The gravel crunched under my tires as I turned onto Maple Hollow Road, the same road I'd ridden my bike down 1,000 times as a kid. The late afternoon sun slanted through the trees, scattering golden patches across the cracked pavement. It had been more than 20 years since I'd last driven this way, and yet every bend and mailbox felt familiar, like stepping into an old photograph. My heart thudded when I saw it at the end of the lane. My childhood home, the one my parents had bought when they were newly married, the one where birthdays, scraped knees, and lazy summer evenings all lived in the same breath. The once vibrant blue paint had faded into a tired gray, the shutters hung crooked, and the porch railing was splintered with rot. The front yard that used to hold my mother's rose bushes was now an overgrown patch of weeds and thistle. But I didn't see neglect. I saw memories buried under the dust. I'd spent the last 10 years living in the city, working long hours, chasing promotions, and pretending that the concrete skyline was enough. But something about the hum of traffic and the anonymous glow of apartment windows never felt like home. When I saw the listing for this house online, something inside me shifted. It wasn't just nostalgia, it was a pull, like the universe whispering it's time to come back. When I stepped out of the car and stood at the gate, a rush of childhood flooded over me. The smell of freshly cut grass, the sound of cicadas, the creak of that same rusty gate as I pushed it open. The air was quieter here, softer somehow, as though it still remembered my laughter echoing across the yard. I walked up the porch steps slowly, each one groaning under my weight, and unlocked the front door with the new key I'd picked up from the realtor that morning. The hinges protested as the door swung open, revealing a space caught between time and decay. The wallpaper had peeled, the hardwood floors were dull and scratched, and a faint smell of mildew lingered. But in my mind's eye, I saw my mother humming in the kitchen, my father reading the newspaper in his recliner, and my little sister running down the hallway with a blanket tied around her neck like a cape. This house wasn't just wood and nails, it was the vessel of our family story. I spent that first evening sitting on the living room floor with a single lamp plugged into the only working outlet, surrounded by boxes of cleaning supplies, takeout food, and an old photo album I'd brought from storage. The photos were yellowed and curled, but every image was a portal. There I was on the porch steps in my first Halloween costume. There we were around the Christmas tree. There was Dad painting the fence while Mom scolded him for dripping on the sidewalk. I felt a lump rise in my throat, part sadness and part gratitude. I had left this place as a restless teenager, desperate to escape small-town life, but now, sitting in that dim light, I realized I'd spent years trying to find what I'd already had, belonging, peace, roots. The restoration began the next morning. I had saved enough to take some time off work, and I planned to do as much of the labor as I could myself. The first step was clearing the yard, a full day's battle against weeds that reached my knees and vines that had crept up the siding. With each shovel of dirt, I unearthed bits of the past, an old toy truck, a rusted tricycle wheel, the corner of a garden stone engraved with my mother's initials. It was backbreaking work, but it felt sacred. I was reclaiming not just a property, but a piece of myself. Once the yard began to take shape, I turned my focus indoors. The kitchen was a disaster. The cabinets swollen from years of humidity, the sink rusted around the edges. Still, I could almost hear my mother's voice when I scrubbed the counters, smell her cinnamon rolls when I opened the old oven door. I replaced fixtures, patched holes, sanded the floors, and painted until my arms ached. Every evening, I'd stand back and look at the progress, slow but steady, and feel a deep satisfaction no promotion or paycheck had ever given me. Neighbors began stopping by, curious about the newcomer reviving that old Stevens place. Most of them were kind, bringing cookies, stories, and curious questions about my plans. Some had lived here long enough to remember me as a kid. Your folks were good people. One elderly woman told me, standing by the fence one morning as I painted the porch. They kept this place looking sharp. It's good to see it loved again. I thanked her, brushing sweat from my forehead, and felt a quiet warmth in her words. Love, that was exactly what I was pouring into the house. It wasn't about resale value or design trends. It was about honoring what once was and creating space for what could be. Weeks turned into months. The faded blue siding was now a cheerful sage green, the porch rebuilt with new planks, the garden replanted with marigolds and lavender. Inside, I stripped the wallpaper and painted the walls a soft cream, the same color my parents had used decades ago. I replaced the old light fixtures with modern ones, but kept the brass doorknobs and the wooden banister that still bore the marks of my childhood, tiny dents from toy swords and marbles. Each day brought a new memory, a new layer of connection. There was something almost therapeutic in the process, a quiet conversation between the past and present. The creak of the floorboards, once eerie, became comforting again, a familiar rhythm that reminded me I was home. At night, I'd sit on the porch swing I'd installed, watching the fireflies flicker over the yard. The stars here looked brighter than they ever did from the city, and the air smelled of pine and damp earth. Sometimes I'd catch myself talking softly to my parents, to my younger self, to the spirit of the house itself. I'd thank it for waiting for me, for standing through storms and seasons until I found my way back. The more I restored, the more I felt restored myself. It was as though each nail driven, each wall repainted, was mending something invisible inside me, a fractured sense of identity, a longing that had followed me for years. What made the experience even more profound was that the house stood just outside the neighborhood governed by the local homeowners association, a line of jurisdiction my father used to joke about. "We're free folks out here," he'd say with a grin when someone mentioned HOA dues or paint restrictions. Back then, I never understood what he meant. To a kid, it sounded like a small thing, but as an adult who'd spent years living under apartment leases and condo rules, I now knew exactly what he meant. Freedom wasn't just a word, it was the ability to choose, to build, to live without interference. Standing in my reclaimed yard, sweat on my brow, I felt that freedom in every breath. By the end of the summer, the transformation was almost complete. The once abandoned house was alive again, its windows gleaming, its porch wrapped in warm light. Friends who visited couldn't believe the difference. "It looks like something out of a storybook," one of them said, running a hand along the smooth new banister. I smiled, knowing it wasn't just a restoration of wood and paint, it was a resurrection of memory and meaning. When I finally moved my furniture in and slept in my old bedroom again, I lay awake for hours listening to the gentle creak of the settling house, the distant chirp of crickets, and the wind rustling through the trees outside. It was the sound of belonging, of roots replanted. After years of chasing success, I'd found peace not in the noise of ambition, but in the quiet hum of home. It was a warm, breezy morning in early September when I first met them, three neatly dressed individuals walking up my newly painted driveway with clipboards in hand and polite, almost too perfect smiles. I was trimming the hedges near the fence line, lost in thought, when I noticed them pause at the edge of my property, as if sizing it up. The tallest of the three, a man in a crisp polo shirt with a gold HOA emblem embroidered on the chest, raised his hand in a friendly wave. "Good morning," he called out in a tone that was equal parts cheerful and authoritative. "Beautiful work you've done here. I'm Robert, president of the Maple Hollow Homeowners Association." The title rolled off his tongue like it was meant to impress. I wiped my hands on my jeans, feeling a slight twinge of curiosity and caution. "I appreciate that," I replied, "but I'm not part of the HOA. This house sits just outside the boundary line." Robert exchanged a knowing look with the woman beside him, who introduced herself as Sandra, the HOA's treasurer. She had a clipboard stacked with forms and a pen poised like a weapon. "Well," she began in a sugary voice, "technically, while your property isn't currently listed as part of the association, our board recently voted to expand the jurisdiction to include this section of the street. We're bringing everyone into the same community standards for consistency and property value protection." I stared at her for a long moment, unsure if she was serious. "You're expanding your boundaries?" I said, finally. "Can you even do that?" Robert smiled thinly. "It's in everyone's best interest," he said, ignoring my question. "We maintain the landscaping on the shared roads, manage the entrance signage, and coordinate seasonal decorations. You'd benefit from our services." And of course, you'd be contributing to the neighborhood's upkeep through modest annual dues. He said the word modest the way a banker might describe a minor fee. I felt my jaw tighten. I'm not interested, I said, keeping my voice steady. My deed and survey clearly show that this property was never included in the HOA. I intend to keep it that way. The friendly smiles began to falter. Sandra scribbled something on her clipboard. The third visitor, a younger man with an anxious expression, shifted uncomfortably. Robert took a step closer, lowering his voice as if delivering important news. You might want to reconsider, he said. Once the expansion is ratified, all properties within the updated map will be subject to our covenants. We'll send you the paperwork soon. Noncompliance could result in fines. There it was, the threat, thinly disguised under a veneer of neighborly concern. I took a deep breath, meeting his gaze. You can draw whatever maps you like, I said, but this house isn't part of your association. It never was, and it never will be. You don't have any authority here. They didn't take that well. The conversation soured quickly. Robert's smile disappeared entirely, replaced by a clipped professional tone. We'll be in touch, he said, turning sharply on his heel. The trio walked back down the driveway, murmuring among themselves. As they disappeared down the street, I felt a flicker of disbelief mixed with anger. I had returned to this home seeking peace, and now it seemed bureaucracy was trying to crawl right up to my doorstep. A few days later, an envelope appeared in my mailbox, stamped with the HOA's logo. Inside was a letter written in formal legal language, informing me that per recent board decisions and community charter updates, my property was now considered part of the Maple Hollow Residential Association and that I was expected to comply with all community guidelines, remit annual dues of $1,200, and submit any exterior modification requests for approval. They even enclosed a list of alleged violations, the color of my house, which they claimed was not an approved shade, the height of my backyard fence, and the unregistered garden structure, which I assumed referred to my small shed. I read the letter twice, my hands shaking with a mix of disbelief and outrage. It was absurd, a complete overreach of power. That evening, I called my friend Nathan, a real estate attorney. After listening to the whole story, he laughed, not because it was funny, but because he'd heard similar tales before. They can't just annex your property like that, he said firmly. HOAs have defined boundaries established by the original developer and recorded with the county. If your deed shows you're outside those limits, they have zero authority over you. Send them a written response, polite but firm, and copy the county recorder's office if they persist. I followed his advice to the letter. My response was short, professional, and clear. I included a copy of my property deed and boundary survey, highlighting the line that placed my home outside the HOA's jurisdiction. I ended the letter by requesting that they cease all attempts to contact or harass me regarding membership or compliance. I sent it via certified mail and kept the receipt. For a week, there was silence. I thought maybe the issue had died, quietly. But then, one morning, I woke to find a bright orange notice taped to my fence, an official violation warning citing my failure to comply with HOA standards. It was signed by Robert himself. That was the last straw. I contacted Nathan again, and within days, he drafted a formal cease and desist letter on legal letterhead. It outlined the HOA's lack of jurisdiction, referenced state property laws, and warned that any further harassment would result in legal action for trespassing and intimidation. We mailed it to the HOA board and their attorney. The response was almost immediate, an apologetic email from Sandra claiming the whole thing was a misunderstanding, that their records must have been outdated, and that they never intended to cause distress. Of course, it was a lie. They'd been caught and they knew it. In the weeks that followed, I started hearing stories from neighbors, homeowners who'd been strong-armed into joining the HOA over the years, pressured with similar threats. Some had complied out of fear or convenience. Others, like me, had fought back quietly. One older gentleman, Mr. Langley, who lived 2 doors down, told me over coffee one afternoon they tried the same trick on me 15 years ago. Claimed they expanded the map. I called their bluff. You did the right thing, son. His approval meant more than I expected. With time, the tension faded. The HOA stopped sending letters, and their members stopped walking past my driveway with their clipboards. I began to enjoy the simple rhythm of life again, mowing the lawn on my own schedule, planting sunflowers along the fence without needing anyone's permission, repainting the shutters just because I liked the color. Freedom, I realized, wasn't loud or defiant. It was quiet, the peace of knowing that what you built and loved was truly yours. One crisp autumn evening, as I sat on my porch swing watching the leaves drift across the yard, I thought about how close I'd come to losing that piece to paperwork and power plays. My father had always said, "Home is the one place that should belong only to you." I finally understood what he meant. The HOA's attempt to control my property had reminded me just how fragile independence can be when others mistake authority for ownership. But this house that had watched me grow, leave, and return, stood as proof that some things are worth protecting. Now, when I look out at the trimmed yard and freshly painted porch, I don't just see the home I restored. I see resilience, mine and the homes alike. The battle with the HOA was an unwelcome chapter, but in a strange way, it reaffirmed everything I'd come back here to find. Roots, autonomy, the quiet power of saying no. The gate still creaks when I open it, just like it did when I was a child, and every time I step through, I'm reminded that this patch of earth, my patch, doesn't belong to any association or committee. It belongs to the memories that built it and the person who fought to keep it free.